a lot of already said during the doorstep, but I will repeat that we're awaiting an important debate today that will decide our approach towards the situation on currently on Belarusian and Polish border, but we would like to call it a situation on our common border, because even though there's more pressure on Polish border currently, but it could switch any moment. And we're seeing increased pressure on our border as well. And there are some worrying signs that the pressure is changing, because earlier, several weeks ago, the possible attempts to cross the border were mostly near the southern part of the border. That means that near the Polish border. But now we're seeing attempts to cross the border all over the perimeter, which is almost 700 kilometers long. So we will be discussing the fifth sanction package, which is very important. But I would like to express the main idea of the sanctions. What are we expecting to achieve with the sanctions? So our point of view is that any sort of, be it sanction package, be it political pressure, call it what you want, but we need to make sure that no planes with people with intention to migrate should land in Belarusian airports. This is what we've been telling since the crisis started in the very early days of summer. This is what we've been trying to achieve with the Iraqi flights. It happened, and this is what is still going on, and this is what we think that it's one of the most important things. The second thing is we need to address the humanitarian situation inside Belarus. If our information is correct, we have somewhere in between from 10 to 20,000 people in Belarus currently. And we know that many of them feel that they are deceived, they were deceived, that they would end up in Germany. They are not in Germany, they're in the forests of Belarus, and they want to go home. And they need to be allowed to go home. And Lithuanian government is ready to assist on a technical part of the returning of the people, but we need to make sure that there is a safe passage for them from the border or from wherever they are to the nearest airport where they could be picked up and provided their transport to their home countries. And thirdly, we need to address also a legal part of the situation. There are people who are responsible for the whole operation, for the whole hybrid operation. First of all, it's the leader of operation is Alexander Lukashenko himself, but there are other people within his regime who took their part in bringing people in, organizing their trips, pushing them to the border, deceiving them, taking their money, and there is an obligation by the Western society to address this as well. So these are the main points that I will be bringing up to my colleagues during the debate. So thank you for the chance to brief you about the upcoming debate. And I would be ready to answer the questions. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Minister. I would like to ask two questions. One question, are you considering another steps regarding Belarus? I'm talking about financial things. And just to make it clear, are you talking about these technical details of corridor? Are you talking about transporting from border to Vilnius airport?
No, the people are in Belarus, and they need to be brought back from Belarus. So the closest airport is Grodno Airport, and in and around Grodno area there are big groups of people, to our knowledge thousands of people, and many of them would like to return home. Therefore, the easiest way for them to get back would be either planes would be sent to Grodno Airport to pick them up. And we're ready to provide the technical assistance together with probably other countries, other institutions. But first of all, it's probably with the help of United Nations. We need to make sure that the people are allowed to reach the airport. Now, the first question is about the sanctions. Obviously, it was mentioned that we are foreseeing a possibility of further sectoral sanctions even, but not as a part of the fifth package because basic principles are already agreed here. But I think that the discussion about the further packages are not off the table.
Yes, please. Thank you. You're talking about more sanctions, economic sanctions, sectoral sanctions, but we have seen that so far Lukashenko doesn't seem to be impressed by anything that the European Union is doing. So why are you confident that it's going to change if you have imposed more sanctions? Thank you.
Well, I think that that's a very good question, and I think that we really need to look into our instruments that we're applying. Our sanctions is what I would call, especially sectoral sanctions, this is what I would call a very gradual approach to a sanction regime. And just to give you one example, on the fourth package, we've imposed the sanctions on tobacco sector, which is, to our knowledge, is quite important to the regime. Because they are not only producing tobacco, but they are also smuggling tobacco back to the EU, getting some cash, and which is cash revenue, and it's being brought back to the regime. But interestingly enough, on the last steps of imposing the fourth sanction regime, tobacco itself was removed from the sanctions. So we have sanctioned everything, filter, tobacco paper, rolling machines, but not tobacco. So Lukashenko, unfortunately, cannot, purchase new tobacco rolling machines, but he can, very well produce cigarettes and all other things that he wishes. So when you're saying that he's not impressed, so I might see a reason there.
Adam?
Minister, Adam Parsons from Sky News. Two questions, if I may. One is, quite clearly, the Kremlin is backing Mr. Lukashenko. Without EU pressure on Russia, do you think anything will hurt him? And a second question is about the humanitarian position. As the weather gets colder, people in this situation clearly will start suffering and indeed dying. If there are people dying on your border, what can you do about it other than watch a tragedy unfold?
Well, first of all, about Mr. Putin, and I fully agree that he's driving this crisis together with Mr. Lukashenko. Politically, that's for certain, and I'm very worried about the possible notions of some that appear at least in the press. We're seeing Mr. Putin as a part of solution to the crisis. I would never, ever see Mr. Putin as a solution as a crisis. He's part of the problem. He's a part of the problem, and it has to be very clearly stated. Humanitarian crisis. Well, interestingly enough, Lithuania was the first country to address United Nations. It was in July that I've sent the first letter to Geneva, to the Commissioner for Refugees, saying that if the flights are not stopped, we will have crisis on the border, and we really need United Nations to get involved. Unfortunately, back then we didn't get a reply, so we started pushing through all the available channels that the crisis needs to be solved where it is started. That doesn't mean that we don't feel our obligation, and we're trying to. Without going further into the details, I can say that we are trying to mitigate humanitarian consequences of what Mr. Lukashenko is creating on Polish and Lithuanian border.
Ministro, why, I'm switching languages. Why do you think, why did you decide to stop all access to journalists and NGO in the 5 kilometers, behaving exactly like Poland, after Poland has been condemned over and over and over for doing that? Why not let journalists do their work?
Well, first of all, two things. One thing is that for the first time in Lithuanian history, the territory on the border was declared the area of emergency. For 30 years we've been independent, and this never happened. That means that we have a very acute and real crisis on the border. That's one thing. Secondly, we are allowing access. I would not compare ourselves to Poland because I might not know all the details that are in Poland. What I can tell you that Lithuanian authorities, the border control and the crisis management team, so to say, we are allowing, to the best of our possibility, people, journalists and NGOs to the border. Yes, it is limited, and it is quite not difficult to explain why it is limited, but we are trying to give as much access as possible.
Minister Gabrielis from Politico. Hello. I have two questions because the first one is on whether you see a link between what's going on with Belarus and the piling up of troops in Ukraine. And secondly, and if you see this link, what are the implications? And secondly, since you just said that Putin is part of the problem and not the solution, does this mean that the EU should also consider further sanctions on Moscow? Thanks.
Well, the two questions are actually interlinked. And when the discussion started about that there's not the discussion, but the information appeared that there's additional troop buildup on Ukrainian border. If you check the map, you see where the buildup is happening. It's actually the same distance is from the border of Belarus, and the same distance is to the border of Ukraine. So I think that what Putin might be playing here is that we don't have an answer who is under attack. It is very likely that Ukraine could be attacked while we are dealing with the situation on Polish, Lithuanian, and Belarusian border. But we have to take into account and not forget the fact that there is also a possibility that Belarus could be attacked in the sense that what we would see as a very increased military cooperation between Belarus and Russia would actually be a permanent military presence, Russian military presence in the territory of Belarus. So that means that both options are available and they are still on the table. And this is what I mean, that basically he can go either way. And what we might see one day is that Belarusian border guards might be replaced with Russian FSB border guards. And that would mean, in essence, further annexation of a country. Therefore, the signal has to be very clear of what you're saying, that we're seeing this. We're seeing this. This is not happening out of thin air. We know that Russian military is on the border. We know that they're involved. We know that Russian special troops landed in Belarus, a few kilometers away from Lithuanian border, while just a few days ago, they're involved there. That means that if we see them active in the escalation, then yes, they would have to answer for that as well.
Could you mean then asking for the sanctions?
There are instruments. Sanctions is one of the instruments.
Clarify, do you have any evidence for such claims, or is this just your supposition?
Which claims?
That there may be a Russian attack while the EU is dealing with Belarus?
This is an assumption, basically, but it is since the geographical distance is rather similar. I would not exclude that as a possibility.
Okay, we have a question over there.
Hello, Minister Yanis Palaiologos from Kathimerini in Greece. A question about you said one of the priorities today is to stop people getting to Minsk so that they can increase the pressure on the border. We've seen some statements in recent days from third country airlines, from the Turkish Civil Aviation Authority, among others. Do you feel you have enough assurances at this point that the trickle will be reduced almost to zero? And does that mean that the conversation about possibility of sanctions of such companies is going to be frozen for now?
Excellent question. First of all, the news that reached us are really encouraging. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank the company that took these decisions, because not taking these decisions means that the passengers on the planes are being brought to horrible conditions. And airlines were participating in this. So those who stopped are doing an excellent job in protecting the people who would otherwise be their passengers and then end up in Belarusian forests. But that doesn't mean that it's over. We know that the crisis itself is mutating. We know that the regime is looking for new opportunities. I cannot disclose all the information, but because maybe some of it it's changing again, but we're receiving a lot of news that the countries are being approached, airlines are being approached, charter companies are being approached in order to open new routes to Minsk. Therefore, our suggestion was that there are several ways to go about. One way is just to go after the airlines, probably with sanctions like we're doing with Belavia, and I'm very hopeful that it will pass, that the 27 will agree that Belavia is in the fifth package. Politically convincing, like it happened with Iraqi Airways, using the arguments and then all the instruments that we have. But the other way around would be sanctioning the airports themselves, or even the ground service companies that are servicing the airplanes. And I know that it has not been done before by European Union, but I think that could be a very strong message that the airports are a part of the problem. They're facilitating bringing in people. Therefore, as commercial entities, they could go under the sanctions. But as at the beginning I've told, basically our interest is to see Minsk Airport and other airports a no-fly zone for the time being for all commercial airlines up until the point we're sure that the crisis is over.
I have a question over there.
Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Minister, two questions. First one, are you going to raise the issue of common funding for border infrastructure? And is Lithuania able to fully finance the 700 kilometers barrier? And also, do you see a shift in the discussion among your colleagues? That's the first part. And the second part, you're obviously weighing to call a NATO Article 4 assembly. What do you expect of NATO?
Well, first of all, Lithuania is committed to building the barrier. It's a big burden on our budget. We would very much rather use the money elsewhere. And as any other country, we have, and our people have many needs. At this point, and why we've raised this issue, because we believe that we're building not the border of Lithuania and Belarus, but we're building a barrier between European Union and a regime that is ready to build pressure on the Union. And therefore, we kind of raise the question whether it's fair that one country is spending so much money on the barrier that basically will be used for all of us. So we're not pushing the debate. We will be spending our taxpayers' money ourselves, but we're glad that the debate has started. And I think that I know that it's not an easy question for many of our European partners. We understand that, taking all the sensitivities, but we're ready to put the unpleasant question forward. And we're hoping that with some solution would be found. And there's some optimism that we might find a way forward with this. And second question was?
On NATO.
Oh, yes. Yes, we are in a very close consultations with Latvia and Poland. First of all, the fourth Article 4, is meant for consultations. But we believe that at this point, at this time, what our ambassadors are doing during their meetings is sufficient. We're exchanging information, we're consulting and being consulted. So at this point, it is sufficient. But if we see that the situation deteriorates, if we need to ask for assistance, then yes, we would go for invoking the Article 4. But at this point, we don't see a need. To add to that, we would be ready to support either of our neighbors if they would see a need to invoke.
Yes. Thank you. Jennifer Rankin from The Guardian. On the humanitarian assistance, you said you were ready to help people return on flights. How would that work, though, without the cooperation of Belarus, and how would you do that without giving money and resources to Lukashenko? And secondly, just on following up on Jacobo's question, would you like to see Russian entities and individuals on the fifth sanctions list? Should Aeroflot, for example, be included in the package?
Well, I think that the fifth package, I might not sound very optimistic, but I really hope that nothing will be removed from the list that it is agreed now currently. I would not have a lot of hope that something would be added. I will suggest several entities during the debate, but we'll see how that works out. Because usually what we've been seeing that is the list becomes a bit.
But you would like to see Aeroflots on the list.
You know, the thing is that if we are going after one airline, then we have to answer our questions. Why not are we going after the other ones? Because now, if I'm not mistaken, there were 8 that were flying into Minsk, and with our information, probably all of them would bring in at least some people with the intention to cross the border illegally. So that means that, and why we were so outspoken about the airports, because this is then we're not going after each and every airline and trying to convince them or persuade them or pressure them that they would stop flying. Basically, we block the accepting point. We block the accepting point, and then it's up to them to decide whether they are working and cooperating with a sanctioned entity, EA Minsk Airport as a commercial entity. To answer your first question, is there is some cooperation. There is. The UN representatives were allowed on the border. And since Belarus is still a part of UN, they might feel some obligation. Therefore, this is our way forward. This is what we felt that could be a passage forward. That the international organizations such as UN, with the help of a commissioner for refugees, to provide a safe passage for the people who are willing to leave. And then this is where we can help them out. Through the UN, maybe, many countries in the EU would be ready to help, and I don't think that would be very, very difficult. But first of all, we need to build enough pressure on Belarus that they would allow the people to leave.
Well, 2 last questions. Yes, FB.
Lukashenko has just said that Belarus will be pushing migrants to return home. What's your reaction to that?
Well, when Lukashenko is using the word pushing, it always sounds very... Working to return, that sounds better. Well, because we've seen some pushing, actual pushing, and it doesn't look very nice. It's, I have no reason to believe that what he's saying is anyway true, because there have been most of the things that came out from Minsk in the last year after the stolen election was mostly propaganda. But in any case, with enough build-up pressure, I see a possibility that the people would be let go with the organized transit from Belarus. So really, let's just hope that at this point he's saying something true.
Yes.
Thank you, Philippe Renier, Journal Le Soir in Brussels. You mentioned the legal issues against those people responsible for this hybrid operation. What do you have in mind precisely regarding this? Because they are already on the list, the blacklist, frozen assets and so on.
I'm seeing that there was a resolution in European Parliament, and there was a letter signed by the chairs of foreign affairs committees in Europe, which addressed the possibility of going to International Court of Justice for the abuse against people. So I'm thinking there's a legal pathway here as well. One thing that we're talking is blacklisting, sanctioning, but these people are actually responsible for human suffering. And I think that this is what we should really look into.
Can I ask a geopolitical question? Thank you. No, the question would be, so you're talking about war. We're not really in front of a real migration issue. What do you think is happening? Do you think there is a will by Russia and or others to weaken the European Union, or to prevent the European Union to develop, or to become deeper? What is your take on the nature of what's happening?
I would say Russia is using these crises to destabilize EU. You know that, well, at the very least, to test our possibility of making the political decisions that are needed. They're expecting that we would not be able to agree, that any decisions would be vetoed by somebody because the questions on the table are very sensitive, and they know that. Migration issue is probably one of the most sensitive for EU. Therefore, it's an excellent weapon. It's an excellent weapon to use against us. And if we are unable to make a decision, then you can proudly say, look, EU is ineffective. And that, again, builds up new fires inside EU, where we know that there's a sentiment, an anti-EU sentiment, which is being flamed, and many things. So basically, it's a destabilization of the Union. Therefore, it is ever more important for us not only to find practical solutions, but to build up resilience for the possible future events like these. Thank you so much.
Thank you.